Welcome to Book Talks, and I'm your host, Dimpho Mokhade, the show that speaks to education, health, entrepreneurship, and so much more. Today on our show, I have a phenomenal guest. He is a world-traveled. He is one of South African renowned journalists, and he is my icon. And I absolutely feel blessed and honored to have him on our show. Let's welcome our guest, Mr. Mofokeng. How are you, Mr. Mofokeng?
Good morning, good day. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming and honoring our invitation. Now, Mr. Lesley Mofokeng, I want you to tell us who you are outside of your work. Where did you grow up?
Well, my name is Lesley Lehlohonolo Mofokeng, and I am a former journalist. I still write. Once a writer, always a writer.
Yes.
I still get commissioned to do pieces. But I'm a former journalist. I used to work for newspapers, the Sunday Times, the Sowetan, the City Press. Was my last one in 2019, and I also did work for radio. I featured on radio stations like Metro FM, YFM, Kaya FM, Motsweding FM. I don't remember the others. That's what I've actually been doing. And I now write books and I teach at Wits University.
Yeah. And how has that journey transpired into you starting your career? Because like you've mentioned, your list of accomplishments, but we want to start from the beginning. How did that journey start into communications? Who inspired you, first of all, to enter into communications?
I was inspired by my mother. She is still an avid newspaper reader. She read the Sunday Times when I was a child, and even before that, my grandfather was a reader of the Star newspaper. So I come from a family of readers. They've always been readers. I've always been fascinated by newspapers, by images and words and storytelling in the form of a newspaper. And when I was in high school, my English teacher, Mr. Amos Lesley, said to me that I wrote well in terms of creative writing, and those kind of essays and that style of writing. And he said, when I was in matric, that I should go and study communication at the then Bophuthatswana University, UNIBO, which is now Northwest University.
Yeah.
And I went to study communication, and it was like duck to water, really. I enjoyed what I was learning, and in my third year, if not second year, I got a scholarship or an internship to go work for the Sunday Times. So they literally took me out of class to start working as an intern in 1996, and I became permanent in 2008, and that's when my journey in journalism began. I started off as a court reporter, and I was a little frustrated by the courts, and I asked to do something else, and I asked to do entertainment, and they allowed me to do entertainment, and I stayed with entertainment till the end of my journalism career as in the office, in the newsroom. But I did do other things in between, a whole lot of other things.
And how did the newsroom change over time? Because from when you started from Sunday Times to where you ended in 2009, how did that evolution for you?
Well, I can tell you that in my time, we had, I don't know what you call them, we call them computers. What do you call them? Desktop. Because there's laptop, there's desktop. So we used desktop, and there was only one computer in the entire newsroom that had what was known as the internet. And if you want to go do the internet, you had to queue and wait for a turn for this computer, and there's a thing called Yahoo or Google, I don't remember, I think it was Yahoo, and it was called a search engine, whatever that meant. So we used to go there and put words in there and see what you get. It was just this world opening up. And it was scary and exciting. We all wanted to have this internet on our computers, but facilities were not there. I guess it was still too early in the process. in the rollout of the internet, which has become so accessible on our phones. And the newsroom was well staffed. They had lots of photographers. I think the Sunday Times had over 8 photographers, and every story had to have a photographer. So when you went out to interview someone, you must have a photographer. When you went out to cover a service delivery protest or whatever event, you had a companion, a photographer. And we had lots of people doing the design and the layout. And the newspaper was well made, well produced. We were paid not so well, but not so badly, because especially when it comes bonus times, you'd get double, if not triple your salary. But that was then. And now you see that newsrooms have shrunk. They have become very junior. A lot of people move out of journalism because the money is not good. And you want to make a living for yourself. So that's why we end up being writers, because the passion is still there. You cannot stop writing. Storytelling becomes part of you. So to satisfy that need, you go out and write books and get commissioned to do other things. But the newsroom has changed so much. When I left, I remember that I used to be my own photographer. So I had like the nicer phone at that time. And the quality of the images was good enough for print to be used in the newspaper. So I never used to worry when they said, oh, there's no photographers, so your story can't be used. So I used to take my own photos in my interviews. And this was 2019. So you can see how the newspaper business started its decline. And you know that today young people don't read newspapers. They don't want printed word. They'd rather read it from their phones. They'd rather get a link to a story. And that has a direct impact on how newsrooms are staffed and operate.
And what would be your motivation to get us to read again, especially a traditional newspaper?
I think it's in the content. Content is king. It's what we are telling you. It's what we're offering. Newspapers are not breaking news vehicles anymore. That's gone with our generation. We used to sit on stories from Monday. Today is a Monday. We would sit on a story on Monday and publish it on Sunday as breaking news. And that was the world then. But today, news break on social media. Everyone can be a journalist. You go walk down the street, there's an accident, you take a photo. There's ethical issues involved, I agree. But anyone can actually just tell the story, can break the news. And there's a big problem of fake news that we have to deal with, and just how gullible our readers are. People believe everything.
True.
You write something, they don't even question the source, they just accept it as news because it was on Twitter or on X or whatever you call it these days. But I think the newspaper has an important role to play in presenting verifiable information, in presenting analysis and expert advice. Because sometimes news is there, but what does it mean? That's the role of the newspaper, to make it make sense. When they say the interest rates have gone up, that's breaking news. It's on TV, it's on social media. When I get a newspaper, tell me, what does this mean to my grocery list, to my mortgage, to my car installment or whatever. That's the role that newspapers, I think, need to play now. Tell us more about the meaning of news.
Definitely, for sure. I hope our viewers heard it, and I'm definitely going to put that, now that you've said, analyze and don't always take news for news. Always apply your sources and resources that you have as well. And I'd like to highlight on the fact that you've worked with Mama Yvonne Chaka Chaka, and on a recent cover of a well-known magazine. How was that moment, knowing that you've worked with her before on countless occasions? How was it working with Mama Yvonne?
I think it's just a privilege, honestly. I met Mama Yvonne over 20 years ago as a young reporter at the Sunday Times. I was assigned to go interview her at her house in Bryanston. and we became friends. We became mother and son.
Yeah.
She invited me over to Nigeria when South Africa was celebrating 10 years of democracy in 2004, and showed me another side of Nigeria I never knew existed. It was a big deal flying with her. They used to make announcements in the plane to say, by the way, we are joined by the Princess of Africa, Yvonne Chaka Chaka, and people would be cheering in the aeroplane. Yeah! And then, I had my own bodyguard as part of her entourage. And we did a whole lot of things in terms of her work as a musician, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, as a philanthropist. I've worked on so many projects with her, and this latest one that appeared in SMEG was a culmination of a 20-year journey where I had to remind myself that this was the Princess of Africa. It was not just this Yvonne Chaka Chaka, the name that people just say, just, so easily rolls off the tongue. But what does it mean? What does it carry? And how far she's come on this journey of music and how she remains the Princess of Africa. So it was a privilege for me to tell that story and to relive the moments and remind people the greatness of Mama Yvonne Chaka Chaka.
Absolutely. And I'm sure wherever she is definitely proud of you, and hopefully she watches our show as well. With your great achievements, right? So you've been a communicator, you've been in the PR space, you've worked on productions like The Queen and so on and so forth. And now you are a lecturer at Wits University. How does that combination of everything that you've done lead to you being a lecturer at Wits?
I never actually thought about all of these things because, you keep it going, you keep it moving to survive. So I think as a lecturer, I lecture something specific. I do lecture on literary journalism in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Wits. And I work mostly with master students in their research. So I think my knowledge of journalism obviously comes in handy. Having been through the program myself as a graduate of Wits with a book to prove my case, it's easier to advise someone to be a supervisor, to help them craft their proposal, because it starts with a proposal and then the actual research and the output, and produce a master's graduate out of a person. All of that is actually a very special journey, because you have this responsibility to make sure that this person moves from point A to point B. They get in there, they don't actually even understand what a master's program is. The expectations are different. And for example, someone would expect that you are a teacher, and a lecturer is not really a teacher. At postgraduate level, a lecturer becomes something else. As a supervisor, mine is to hold your hand and just point you to the right direction. It is not my job to... you don't spoon feed. At postgraduate level, you become an independent researcher. The idea is to create an independent researcher out of you. But I think Wits has been doing exceedingly well. I wish I was at liberty to brag about the students that we have in the program. Some of the biggest names in South Africa in entertainment, in media space are in that program. I'm sure you'll start seeing them as they graduate and realize that Wits is doing a whole lot of good out there, producing the next generation of postgraduate students and people who are making a real impact in terms of research and in terms of storytelling, because most of them are going to produce books. The research will end up as books that tell the Black South African experience. We deliberate about that. There's a shortage of our stories. Our stories are written out of history. They have been erased. They've not been acknowledged. And we need a lot of people to come out and tell their family histories, church histories, whatever history that's special to you, and can contribute to knowledge, is what we're doing in the department.
I mean, now that you've touched on it, your book, I mean, the colors. It shocks me how this book is. And it says here, the man who shook mountains in the footsteps of my ancestors. Right? I want to ask you, why this cover?
I'm sure you'd agree that the cover or the colors are eye-catching. So when you walk into a bookstore, there's a competition, there's a whole lot of books lying there. Which one is going to jump at you? And I think that red and the burnt orange and the mountains. And
the green as well.
And the green, and hopefully my name. I hope someone will recognize the name and go like, oh, he's written a book. Let me read that. So the cover was designed by my publisher, Jonathan Ball. Initially, my research was actually titled Muruti wa Scooter. So when I went to them, I went with that title. I said, this book is going to be called Muruti wa Scooter. And the publisher was like, no. It's going to be called The Man Who Shook Mountains. And that comes from an interview I had with a church member who said that when my grandfather Aru, when he was preaching, on a sisinya ditaba. So the publisher liked that expression, who's sisinya ditaba. And said, then we should call it The Man Who Shook Mountains then. And that's how we ended up with the title. And in the footsteps of my ancestors is really a journey of self-discovery. I tell the story of my grandfather, the evangelist Wilfred Mofokeng, and the work that he did in this place called Gelexpan in the Northwest District, Northwest Province, in the district of Lichtenberg or Ditsobotla. He built an actual hospital that's still standing today. It's called Gelexpan Hospital. It's not named after him, but anyway, we're not here about that. Anyway, he built that hospital. He built at least 2 schools, 7 churches, built an actual community. And this book tells the story of the actual nitty-gritty and the heavy lifting that he made, he committed to in creating this hospital. The hospital started in the house where they lived. This room was for patients, the other room was the nurse's home, the family slept this side, and now it's this big hospital, this big complex. But it also tells about the story of someone. I grew up in Mofokeng. I'm Mosotho, but I grew up in Mofokeng, and I never really understood what it meant to be Mosotho. So I embark on a journey of self-discovery, ending up in the mountains of Lesotho, standing on the tomb of King Moshoeshoe. The last chapter of this book is written at the actual grave of King Moshoeshoe, where I'm in communication really with the ancestors and understanding that whole place, the Tababusiu area, which next year, 2024, will mark 200 years of the creation of the Basotho nation. In 1824, King Moshoeshoe arrived at Tababusiu and started this nation that became known as Basotho. They were called Basotho, which means the brown people. Sotho in Sotho means brown, and it's become Basotho. And so the journey of the book really tells the story of this amazing man who did amazing things for the community, not recognized, not spoken about, written out of history, erased. And the descendants, which is me, embarking on a journey of understanding what it means to be an African and a Christian at the same time. So in a nutshell, I think I've sold the book.
And for me, what's important was in the footsteps of my ancestors, right? Because you're saying that the last chapter of your book took place on a very sacred place. For you, had you not written this book, had this book been written by somebody else, right? And you read this book, right? As you're saying, it's about your spirituality and you as an African, right? And you as an African man as well. How would that play a role in your life? Or how has writing this book played a role in your life?
I think it has made me understand the choices that my grandfather made, first of all, because I needed to understand he belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church, a church that justified apartheid, a church that was used as part of the apartheid machinery to indoctrinate black people and to use religion as justification of separate development and oppression of our people. And so this research helped me understand that actually this church was not the Afrikaner church. It's called Kereke ya Fora, which means the French church. How it became known as Dutch, we still need to understand, because Dutch is Hollander and Netherlands and all of that.
Yeah.
And that's the link that I'm trying to make between the French and the Dutch. The answer is in the book. I mean, if you're interested in those kind of things, please get the book and understand why it became known as Kereke ya Fora, the French, and Dutch Reformed Church at the same time. And it has also given me peace to understand the choices that King Moshoeshoe made, because there are many debates these days as Africans rediscover who they are, to say we've lost our essence, we've become westernized, we don't know our languages, we lost our way. But here's a Mosotho king, the founder of the Basotho nation, who said it's okay to bring these white people into our space for them to teach us certain things. Was he a visionary? Did he see that the world was moving in a different direction and prepared his people? I mean, he made sure that the language travels. Right now, we sing hymns. These songs, these hymns are sung across the land and in Sesotho. And it's thanks to the work of King Moshoeshoe and the missionaries that came in Lesotho in 1833 and wrote these hymns. I don't know if people know this, that that hymn was written by a white Frenchman, probably with the help of a black person, but officially when you read the records at Morija, because I went to a place called Morija in Lesotho, where they store all of these records of the missionaries, you'll see the original, even the original writing, how Botswana today used the letter G a lot. Back then, Basotho didn't have an H. They also had a G. It's only later that you see they use an H. So these hymns were written, I mean, we're talking about before the 1850s. These hymns were written and sung and taught to Basotho, to black Christians. And that leads me to another story of Beersheba massacre. When you read the book, you read about the Beersheba massacre, where 2,000 black Christians were killed by Afrikaners. Because God knows why. I actually have no reason. Nobody has established why. It was part of the Free State Wars, yes. But for them to target a community of black Christians who were writing hymns, who were translating the Bible, who were publishing their own newspaper called Boledi Weditaba, back as far back as 1840, whatever. I mean, and they killed them in cold blood. 2,000 wiped them out, and the missionaries fled, and that meant the end of this citadel of excellence, of black excellence. Is one of the things that we don't talk about in South Africa, in Lesotho. When we talk about the bloody history of South Africa, I don't think we've ever even heard of this Beersheba massacre of black Christians, because people who committed that were so ashamed that white people came to Africa to bring religion, to bring Christianity, and to civilize us. They found black people who were civilized, who were already religious, who had accepted Christ as their savior, yet they killed them. It's a shameful act. And this book brings those things into light to say, let's not forget about the blood of Beersheba, where 2,000 Christians were killed and were never buried. They were eaten by the birds of the sky. Read the book, you'll see that chapter.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm very interested. Why now? I mean, you've decided only now to write this book. You could have written this book a year ago, 5 years ago, but you've decided today, in 2023, I'm going to write this book. Why now?
You know, I first wanted to do my master's at Wits in 2006, a long, long time ago. I actually even registered, but I dropped out. And my research topic at that time was going to be on a newspaper, how to start a newspaper. That was my research topic. And when they say God's timing is always good timing, it's the right timing, they really do mean it.
That's true.
Because I went back to Wits in 2019, over 10 years later, to say, okay, I'm ready to do that master's degree. And this time around, my research is going to be on my own family history. And I'm going to research my grandfather's life story and the church that I've chosen to belong to. And that's why I ended up with this book. So you can see that it was not of my doing. It was really time and fate and destiny that I would go back to Wits with a different topic. And that was much more personal. And that would end up with me telling the story of my grandfather. By the way, for the longest of time, I knew that I wanted to tell my grandfather's story. I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't know how to do it. And I told myself, like, one day when I'm done with journalism and I'm about to retire, I'll revisit the story of my grandfather and understand his story, because it's not told very well. And when I got to Wits and I did this, and my grandfather, my uncle, in fact, we call him Tate Moholo in Sesotho, is Professor Mofokeng, a very famous black theologian, who is my grandfather's second-born son and my father's elder brother. He helped me a lot with the project. He contributed a lot in terms of his knowledge of family history, of the church, of my grandfather's life story. He's the only surviving member of that family. Everyone is gone. So it's very special to me that I get to tell my family story, and I hope that it inspires Africans, especially Africans, to tell their family history. Everyone has a story about their uncle, their grandfather, their aunt, whoever, who did amazing things, and that those stories are not told. We end up believing that we don't have achievers. We think that when you achieve something in your family, you think you're the first one. And when you do your history, you realize that you had an uncle who was a soccer star that people revered and celebrated, but that story is not told because we don't tell our stories, we don't write them down. We probably use oral traditions, but I think the written word is much more enduring.
That's very true. What can you say to someone who is finding themselves in that dilemma, Harish? Let me wait at least when I'm like 65, and now maybe they're 30 or they're even 25 and being like, yo, I want to write my uncle's story. I want to write my grandfather's story. What message or what words of encouragement would you say to that individual?
I would say you owe it to them. We really owe it to our ancestors and our forebears and people who came before us to tell their stories, to find them and to tell them, because that restores our pride, that reminds us of our greatness. My current research at Wits is reading newspapers from 1901 to 1915. I cannot begin to tell you the stuff that's in there. I must tell you that don't sit here and think that you are the first one to speak good English, or you are civilized, or you are sophisticated. When you read those newspapers, you realize that our ancestors, as far back as 1901, were writing English. In English, they were writing to newspapers and expressing their opinions. They had opinions, they had their own sophistication. You read about their fashion. There's a whole article on a blouse and how to style this particular blouse. It was, I think, published in 1914. And they tell you step by step how to create this particular blouse and what it means when you wear it and how you must wear it and how you must carry yourself. So they had this. They also have recipes of how to make desserts of sauce, all of those things. And these newspapers, amazing stuff. And they also have their own debates. I remember one article that I don't even know. I don't know if there's an age limit on the show.
No.
There's no age limit, so I can say whatever I want. Okay. So one of the stories that I read was on why black people have become inferior in their appearance. And the story was like our ancestors used to have muscles and they were well built, they were strong, they were tall. But these days, look at us, we are so skinny, and yet we have all of this new food that has been introduced by white people. What is going on? What happened to our makeup as human beings, as the black race? And this person wrote this letter to the paper to say, it's because men are sleeping with their pregnant wives. And this is taboo. It should not be done. Because you infect this unborn baby with whatever it is that you are infecting this young baby, this unborn baby with. But in the end, that's why we have this high infant mortality rate. That is why the babies come out and they're just weak. These are the debates that they had.
Yeah.
This one was in 1915, the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So there are all of these debates that are just fascinating. This world that was changing, and the black face was changing. Just really, what's important, what matters to them was changing in 1915, and obviously the years before that and after that. And I get to listen to these conversations of our ancestors to say, how did we end up here? Really, the reason why I'm doing this is to understand why we ended up here, why our diet changed. I mean, there's not an African name for sweets. Sweets are not African. They were never created by Africans. And you know where the pompon comes from? It comes from the French word bonbon. When you say sweets, because the French is bonbon, B-O-N-B-O-N. Yeah. And Basotho had this bonbon. They said, oh, bonbon. And that's how they became the sweets. There's in Xhosa and other Nguni languages, but amalekes. Yeah. Lekkers from Africans. These are not things that are meant for our bodies as Africans, by the way. And even this porridge, I don't know if you know that maize. Maize is not African. It's from Mexico.
Really?
It came just recently. It was never part of our diet. Our diet was mabele. Yet today we've accepted papa as our staple. This is what we eat. When we say we have African, what do you call this, Heritage Day celebrations, bring African food, we bring maize. Maize is Mexican. It's not African. It was introduced much later in our diets. That is why we are out of shape. That is why we have all of these diseases. Because what God meant and created for us as Africans has been replaced by these quick fixes and things that are foreign, that have entered our systems and changed who we actually are. This research is for later. I don't know why I'm even talking about it now. Anyway.
Like, it's so interesting. I've never considered it, right? As to think far beyond that, obviously. And now that you have enlightened all of us, and especially me, I'm like, oh my gosh.
It's important, you know what, that's the role of the researcher.
Yeah.
It's so important that we have people who study postgraduate degrees and all of that. Because this is where this is where they come out. When they start digging and wanting to understand things. That's why we need people to go to universities and tertiary institutions to further their studies so that they can come and enlighten us and say, hey, look what I found. Do you know that in 1915 they were debating about whatever these issues are, so that we can understand where we're going? It's so, when people say, know where you come from to know where you're going, they really mean this.
True.
So that we know where we're going. Is this the right path that we want for ourselves as a people? We need to know what happened in the past.
Very true, very true. Now, revisiting the past, right? Yeah. You have written books for phenomenal celebrities like Mr. Somidi, Mrs. Kanyimbao, and many others, right? Have they co-writing their books for them or editing their book for them, have it enhanced you to write this book or have brought you to write this book?
I think it gave me confidence. My first book that I ever wrote was the Kanyimbao biography back in 2012. And at that time I was a frustrated journalist. I was unhappy. I didn't feel like I was being challenged. My creativity and my and my just talent, I felt like I'm being wasted.
Yeah.
So someone actually wrote me on Facebook and said, why don't you write Kanyimbao's book? And I was like, okay, that's not a bad idea. And I approached him. We were actually at a party at the Kardashians in Joburg. The Kardashians were in Joburg in 2010. And I said, I think we should write your book. And she said, yes, I'm calling you. It was in December, late in December. And she said, next year, 2011, I'm calling you. And on the dot, on the 2nd of January, Kanyimbao called me and said, let's start. Yeah. She was turning 25 that year. Oh. And I did my whole research. I was still a journalist, obviously, at the City Press. So after work, I would go to her house and sit and have interviews, like literal interviews, sit down, make notes for at least 3 months to 6 months, writing her book. It took us a year before we could publish. And publication of that book did me good. It gave me the confidence that you can do this. The book went on to sell, is a bestseller. And she always credits it as a form of her rebirth, because she was turning 25. And when you read that book and the stuff that she had done for a 25-year-old, it just boggles the mind. You wonder what's waiting for her in there for the next 25.
Yeah.
And I guess we're getting answers now, looking at her life. But it's one of my favorite books. It was truly special to me. It came at a time when I needed to prove it to myself that I could do more than just newspaper articles.
Yeah.
And then other books came. I mean, I even wrote a cookbook. I didn't write the recipes. The story was actually about maize. That's why I actually did my research to find out that actually maize is not even African. It's Mexican. It was brought here by ships. It was easy to plant and to process, and that is why. So what we eat is actually because it's easy to process, not because this is what God intended for us to eat, or creation intended for us to have as our diet. But yeah, so, and I did other books that are, I told the story of a mining magnate in Rustenburg, Matthew Molobeng. I did his biography, and many other things. And I suppose at the end of the day, all these things lead to the person that I am today. The confidence to write. When I wrote that book, it was a lot of work. It started off as research, as I said. And doing a master's degree after over 10 years of not studying is not the easiest thing to do. I even developed back pains from reading and just writing. It was that intense. But I was determined to finish the degree and publish the book.
And now coming to the second book of Mr. So Blackies, right?
Yes.
And you are a contributor to this book. Please tell us a bit about this book briefly, just briefly.
People are going to say I'm boring with all of this history and enough now with people from 1902. This one is, we revisit the Mofokeng diary. So the Mofokeng diary is an important piece of writing. So Blackie kept a diary during the Boer War, or the South African War. Some people prefer to call it that. During what was known as the Mofokeng siege, when the Boers, besieged the town between October 1899 and March 1900. The importance of this diary, this Mofokeng diary, is that for the longest of time, the South African War was known as the Anglo-Boer War, which was the war between white people. It had nothing to do with black people. Stay out of it. You can't claim anything. This was a white man's war. Until it was discovered in 1969 by anthropologist Professor Komarov, when he did some work in Mofokeng and asked people to bring out just old papers. And then he started reading these old papers and realized this was a diary, a war diary. And that diary brought the facts to light, that black people were soldiers in the war. Black people died directly from the shots and the shelling of the town of Mofokeng. And that is why in the end, the debate was like, you cannot call it the Anglo-Boer War and exclude black people. Black people contributed. They were runners, they were soldiers, they died, they contributed, they were part of this war. They experienced it, they are victims. They needed to be compensated for their losses. Black people were part of the war. Stop calling it a white man's war. So now, it was published in 1973. 50 years later, they called scholars of So Blackies to come around the table and discuss this diary. What does it mean 50 years later? What have we learned from our own different disciplines? So I came in from the literary journalism discipline to say, when you read the book, literary journalism is journalism that reads like a novel. When you read it, it feels like you're reading fiction, but actually it's the facts. It's cinema. There's this cinematography in it. So people think it's just beautiful writing, but we call it literary journalism. Prose and all of those things. There's characterization, there's immersion, there's vividness. So when you read something and you can imagine, you can see this picture
in your mind.
That is literary journalism in a nutshell, briefly. So my chapter talks about what I see as literary journalism in the diary, because So Blackies' diary was more than just the voice of black people, but it was just exceptionally written. For someone who has standard 3, So Blackies only had standard 3, didn't go to varsity, didn't go anywhere. He was just a genius, self-made genius that is not celebrated enough. We only know about him about being a founder, a co-founder of the ANC as the founding Secretary General, but he was also a literary giant and a respected editor and journalist. As I say, I'll come back some other time to talk about his journalism and the newspapers.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, going on a lighter note, right? You've touched on entertainment. You went into the entertainment, right? As a popular culture commentator, right, for the music awards, television, and so forth, has popular culture in South Africa, has it in any way surprised you of its evolution?
The evolution of popular culture in South Africa, that's an interesting question, actually. I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
But it has come a long way. It has matured. I think it has definitely matured when it has moved from the frivolous. I mean, there was a time when I was a journalist when all we wrote about was who was dating who and who was seen in the toilets with who at an event or who arrived with who.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time it made sense. People bought newspapers, there was interest. But I think people have become woke and want substance. Don't tell me about all of those things. I'm not really interested.
Yeah.
Tell me about the significance of events.
Yeah.
And I think even journalism had to catch up with serving shwa-shwi content, with actual meaningful content that people can digest, people can use, and can learn something out of it. South African music has taken over the world. I don't know if you know Tyler. I don't know if you know the Water
Tyler.
Challenge. I tried,
Exactly.
it's not for me. You done the Water Challenge?
No, no.
I don't know if you know what the Water Challenge is.
It is. Well, it's a very hard challenge.
Okay.
Some people can do it, but it's not for
All
me.
right, I see. So anyway, I mean, Tyler went all over the world to do the Water Challenge on this big American show. Zakes Bantwini, Wouter Kellerman, and Nomcebo scored won a Grammy Award. Black Coffee filled up the Madison Square Garden in New York. So all of these amazing things are happening to show you that the industry is now ready for the world. There was a time when all they wanted was to go to America to become big stars. It never really happened. It's happening now because we've matured, we've become stronger, and we're claiming our world. I mean, our beauty queens are winning world titles. Bonang is doing amazing things. I think the entertainment space is in a great space.
Yeah.
And it's just, for the next generation to take it further and do all of these amazing things. The Boks are winning all over the world. It's a great time to be a South African, actually.
And having worked on TV productions such as Strictly Come Dancing, Gauteng Sports Awards, and Motswako, right? How or what are the lessons that you have learned through that journey as a scriptwriter that you can tell the younger generation, as us here, we are youth, and what are your parting words or what are the lessons that you've learned and can teach us?
Yeah, just don't get comfortable.
Yeah.
Don't get comfortable. Don't accept your situation. Don't play victim. Don't sit and say, oh, I'm not getting opportunities. I mean, all of these things I did because I felt like I was not reaching my full potential. And I never want to sit and be comfortable and feel like, oh, now I've achieved this much, that's it. I'm always challenging myself, wanting to know what can I learn. I'm always learning a new language. I'm always learning something else. Like there's so much to do in this world that you cannot just accept your situation and feel like you have arrived. You never arrive. The journey is just always ongoing. Someone knows more than you do. Go and find those people. Ask them to help you get to where they are.
True.
So just keep challenging yourself. Just don't accept your situation and don't get comfortable. Never get comfortable.
I think what I'm going to take away from your encouraging words is never get comfortable.
No.
Never get comfortable.
No.
Always sit at the edge of your seat.
Yes.
That's how you want to sit when you sit on a chair.
Yes.
Definitely, for sure. Now, touching on the summer awards that are coming up, right?
Yes.
You were once a judge. Am I right in saying that?
Correct.
All right. you recently served as a judge for the Summer Awards, and now you are the spokesperson. And I would like to know, what are your challenges and successes?
I think the biggest challenge about the Summer Awards is education. Teaching South Africans, first of all, the importance of these awards. But I think I should say how the awards work. Because there's always controversy about who wins and who doesn't win. And it comes from just ignorance. And just people don't know. We try to talk about these things, but we don't get through to the people to understand how the summers work. And then what's also important is the role that the summers work in the in the creative economy. And also is in the cultural space. Why it's so important to have the summers. What does it mean to the music industry? What does it do to an individual artist who gets nominated, who wins? What just the meaning of the summer? I think that's the biggest challenge. But there are people in the industry who are making their voices heard and helping us as the recording industry of South Africa to remind South Africans that, musicians are not just frivolous people who wear skimpy clothes and jump on and up and down a stage. They actually really contribute to the economy of the country, to the GDP of the country. So when you go to a certain province or a city and host the summers, the benefits are immense. When you think about the money spent, the hotels, the restaurants, the traveling, just this huge number of people injected in one particular space contributes to the economy of a city or a province. But I do believe that South Africans know the importance of the summer, having said that. And I think it's a brand that's entrenched in South African, not just entertainment space, but in being a South African. You want to know that the summers are happening, who are the winners, who are the performers, who's going. Everyone wants to have a ticket to the summers. But I think they need to still learn a bit more about how they work and the fact that it's a proudly South African project that's been going on for 29 years. It's the longest surviving music award ceremony in South Africa, probably the continent. It's 30 years next year, 30 years of democracy. It's a huge milestone, and I hope South Africans will remember that and be jealous about the summers and want to protect that brand.
Obviously. And now, concluding our interview, my last two questions I want to ask: where do we get this lovely book of
This
ours?
lovely book can be bought at exclusive books, some bargain books stores. Really, a lot of bookstores have stocked it. You can get it online. You can buy it through Take a Lot, Amazon, all of those e-commerce platforms. And you can also even approach me on social media. You can DM me and I can sign it for you. And sometimes I can deliver depending on the distance. But it's easily, you can easily get it all across platforms.
All right. And what are your social media handles?
At Lesley Mofokeng, that's it. At Lesley Mofokeng throughout Twitter, Facebook, obviously Lehlohonolo Mofokeng on Facebook, and at Lesley Mofokeng on X, not Twitter, on X, and Instagram, and not so much TikTok. And it's simply because TikTok keeps blocking me. I don't know why. I don't know if it's my content. I don't think it's X-rated, but they keep blocking me, so no TikTok.
TikTok must make a plan, hey? But I really appreciate your time and your efforts for being with us. And I really want to say thank you for your contribution to our industry that we can call the creative industry and the creative hub of our industry. And thank you for being one of the pioneers. I thank you very much.
You're so kind. Thank you so much for inviting me. I had such a great time. Thank you for the wonderful questions. Thank you for starting the conversations. I hope people who watch this will question themselves more and the decisions and the decisions that they make about where this country is going. Thank you so much.
And as you've heard it here, guys, that this was a mouthful and a half. I'm inspired, my cup is full, and hopefully as you. And please join us. Until next week, I'm your host, Dimpho Mohale. Peace.